Welcome to this podcast on the Arctic Council. The Arctic Council is a high-level intergovernmental forum that addresses issues faced by the Arctic governments and the indigenous people of the Arctic. The 8 countries with sovereignty over the lands within the Arctic Circle constitute the members of the Council: Canada, Denmark, Finland, Iceland, Norway, Russia, Sweden, and the United States. Outside these, there are some observer states. Let's take a look at the history of the Arctic Council. The first step towards the formation of the Council occurred in 1991, when the 8 Arctic countries signed the Arctic Environmental Protection Strategy (AEPS). The 1996 Ottawa Declaration established the Arctic Council as a forum for promoting cooperation, coordination, and interaction among the Arctic states, with the involvement of the Arctic indigenous communities and other Arctic inhabitants on issues such as sustainable development and environmental protection. The Arctic Council has conducted studies on climate change, oil and gas, and Arctic shipping. In 2011, the Council member states concluded the Arctic Search and Rescue Agreement, the first binding treaty concluded under the Council's auspices. Let's take a look at the membership and participation. The Arctic Council is made up of member and observer states, indigenous permanent participants, and observer organizations. The member states. Only states with territory in the Arctic can be members of the Council. The member states consist of the following: Canada, Denmark, also representing Greenland, Finland, Iceland, Norway, Russia, Sweden, and the United States. Now the observer states. Observer status is open to non-Arctic states approved by the Council at the ministerial meetings that occur once every 2 years. Observers have no voting rights in the Council. As of May 2019, 13 non-Arctic states have observer status. Observer states receive invitations for most Council meetings. Their participation in projects and task forces within the working groups is not always possible, but this poses few problems as few observer states want to participate at such a detailed level. The observer states consist of the following as of 2019: Germany, Netherlands, Poland, United Kingdom, France, Spain, China, India, Italy, Japan, South Korea, Singapore, Switzerland. In 2011, the Council clarified its criteria for admission of observers, most notably including a requirement of applicants to recognize Arctic states' sovereignty, sovereign rights, and jurisdiction in the Arctic, and recognize that an extensive legal framework applies to the Arctic Ocean, including notably the law of the sea, and that this framework provides a solid foundation for responsible management of this ocean. Some pending observer states. Pending observer states need to request permission for their presence at each individual meeting. Such requests are routine and most of them are granted. At the 2013 ministerial meeting in Kiruna, Sweden, the European Union requested full observer status. It was not granted, mostly because the members do not agree with the EU ban on hunting seals. Some of the pending observer states as of today are the European Union and Turkey. The role of observers was re-evaluated, as were the criteria for admission. As a result, the distinction between permanent and ad hoc observers were dropped. Some indigenous permanent participants. 7 of the 8 member states have sizable indigenous communities living in their Arctic areas. Only Iceland does not have an indigenous community. Organizations of Arctic indigenous peoples can obtain the status of permanent participant to the Arctic Council, but only if they represent either one indigenous group residing in more than one Arctic state or 2 or more Arctic indigenous peoples groups in a single Arctic state. The number of permanent participants should at any time be less than the number of members. The category of permanent participants has been created to provide for active participation and full consultation with the Arctic indigenous representatives within the Arctic Council. This principle applies to all meetings and activities of the Arctic Council. Permanent participants may address the meetings. They may raise points of order that require an immediate decision by the chairman. Agendas of ministerial meetings need to be consulted beforehand with them. They may propose supplementary agenda items. When calling the biannual meetings of senior Arctic officials, the permanent participants must have been consulted beforehand. Finally, permanent participants may propose cooperative activities such as projects. All this makes the position of the Arctic indigenous peoples within the Arctic Council quite unique compared to the often marginal role of such peoples in other international governmental forums. However, decision-making in the Arctic Council remains in the hands of the 8 member states on the basis of consensus. As of 2014, 6 Arctic indigenous committees had permanent participant status. These groups were represented by the Aleut International Association, the Arctic Athabaskan Council, the Gwich'in Council International, the Inuit Circumpolar Council, the Russian Association of Indigenous Peoples of the North, and the Sami Council. These indigenous organizations vary widely in their organizational capacities and the size of the population they represent. To illustrate, RIPON, or the Russian Association of Indigenous Peoples of the North, represents some 250,000 indigenous people of various, mostly Siberian peoples. The ICC, or the Inuit Circumpolar Council, represents 150,000 Inuits. On the other hand, Gwich'in Council and Aleut Association each represents only a few thousand people. However prominent the role of indigenous peoples, the permanent participant status does not confer any legal recognition as peoples. The Ottawa Declaration, the Arctic Council's founding document, explicitly states in a footnote, the use of the term peoples in this declaration shall not be construed as having any implications as regard the rights which may attach to the term under international law. The indigenous permanent participants are assisted by the Arctic Council Indigenous Peoples Secretariat. The Observer Organizations. Approved intergovernmental organizations and interparliamentary institutions, both global and regional, as well as non-governmental organizations, can also obtain observer status. Organizations with observer status currently include the Arctic Parliamentarians, International Union for Conservation of Nature, the International Red Cross Federation, the Nordic Council, the Northern Forum, the United Nations Development Programme, United Nations Environment Programme, the Association of World Reindeer Herders, Oceana, the University of the Arctic, and the Worldwide Fund for Nature Arctic Programme. Let's take a look at some of the administrative aspects. The meetings. The Arctic Council convenes every 6 months somewhere in the chair's country for a Senior Arctic Officials SAO meeting. SAOs are high-level representatives from the 8 member nations. Sometimes they are ambassadors, but often they are senior foreign ministry officials entrusted with staff-level coordination. Representatives of the 6 permanent participants and the official observers are also in attendance. At the end of the 2-year cycle, the chair hosts a ministerial level meeting, which is a culmination of the council's work for that period. Most of the 8 member nations are represented by a minister from their foreign affairs, northern affairs, or environment ministry. A formal, though non-binding, declaration named for the town in which the meeting is held sums up the past accomplishments and the future work of the council. These declarations cover climate change, sustainable development, Arctic monitoring and assessment, persistent organic pollutants and other contaminants, and the work of the Council's 5 working groups. Arctic Council members agreed to action points on protecting the Arctic, but most have never materialized. Security and geopolitical issues. Before signing the Ottawa Declaration, the United States added as footnote, the Arctic Council should not deal with matters related to military security. In 2019, United States Secretary of State Mike Pompeo stated that circumstances had changed and the region has become an arena for power and competition. And the 8 Arctic states must adapt to this new future. The Council is often in the middle of security and geopolitical issues, since the Arctic has peculiar interest to member states and observers. Changes in the Arctic environment and participants of the Arctic Council have led to a reconsideration of the relationship between geopolitical matters and the role of the Arctic Council. Disputes over land and ocean in the Arctic are extremely limited. The only outstanding land dispute in the Arctic is between Canada and Denmark over Hans Island. The only overlapping sea claim is between the United States and Canada in the Beaufort Sea. Thank you very much for listening on this podcast on the Arctic Council.